I would call myself more of a multidisciplinary teacher, and really looking at what are the principles of breathing that connect all these methods together. So looking at our physiology, our biochemistry, the biomechanics of breath, and then really how that all ladders up to our nervous system. And once we understand those pieces and how that interplays with the nervous system, then we actually have a tool that can empower us to be able to self-regulate and, more importantly, do it in real time.
That is Reis Paluso, and this is the Well Mind Podcast. The Well Mind is a space for meaningful conversations about a broad range of wellness-related topics, with a special emphasis on our mental wellness. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Coles. A warm welcome to each of you. Whether this is your first time or you listen regularly, it's great to have you with me today. My guest in this episode is a surfer, father, husband, entrepreneur, and expert in the practice of breathwork and cold exposure. Relatably, Reis found himself caught up in the ever-accelerating process and goals of building a life through his work, family, friendships, and favorite pastimes, but was simultaneously losing a sense of balance and connectedness in his own life. Then he hit an inflection point, and in my conversation with Reis, he details the steps of the journey he embarked upon to unlock his mind-body connection through breathwork practices. He first studied the Wim Hof method, which often combines specialized breathing techniques and an intentional cold therapy practice. He speaks about some of the transformational experiences this study and practice led to in his life, and ultimately why he started the breathwork platform, Our Breath Collective. This is a first-of-its-kind platform that offers live online daily breathwork sessions and a host of workshops, trainings, and retreats throughout the year. Reis and I explore the connections between our breath, our mental health, and our overall wellness. Traditionally, people often associate breath practices with calming or relaxation-based goals, but Reis explains how breath practices can also be a pathway to increasing energy, sharpening focus, and increasing our vitality. Breathwork has been a catalyst for change and growth in Reis's life, and his passion for this subject shines through in our discussion. Okay, before we dive into this, I want you to pause, breathe in and out. All right. Here is my conversation with the inspiring Reis Paluso in episode 31, Life and Breath. Reis Paluso, thank you so much for coming to the Well Mind Podcast. It's awesome having you here. I've been looking forward to our conversation. I think this is going to be a good one, and I just want to welcome you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ben. It's an honor to be here and to share with you and your audience about things that I'm super passionate about and love. And I think it's great speaking with someone who has some connection points in mental wellness and mental health. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see where this conversation goes.
Yeah, absolutely. So your current kind of field or practice of expertise is really focused on breath work, correct?
Yeah, really breathing has been sort of a thing that's come into my life that has really transformed everything that I do from top to bottom. And through my own exploration and journey of that, really just found a massive passion for the practice and also being able to share it with people, not only in a sense of bringing people through different experiences and sharing knowledge, but also helping other people bring this out into their communities and their world. There's just so many connection points between breathing and a lot of other modalities that people are sharing. And it's such a great complement to be bringing that into other practices that people are working with and sharing. So yeah, it's been a fun journey, and one that I'm sure will continue to evolve and grow, seeing that the breathing world is really kind of at the forefront right now. And it's just an exciting time to be a part of it all. So yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I'm a consumer of podcasts as well. And, things like Dr. Andrew Huberman's podcast, he has done a ton of stuff on breathing and breath work, and he's had some experts on there. And it's really sparked my curiosity about this whole field. We were talking just briefly online before we got into it today, and breathing breath practices or breathing techniques are something that many mental health counselors receive some education and training in, especially as it's connected in with issues of anxiety, down-regulating emotional intensity, even addressing trauma-based symptoms and reactions. Breath work can be a huge part of those practices. So, having you here and being able to kind of take a deep dive into this today, I think is going to be super fascinating. And I love that we get to share it with the WellMind community. Yeah. But before maybe we dive into the deep end of the pool with some of that, help us get to know you a little bit, Reis. Tell us a little bit about your journey and your pathway into this field of breath work. Just a little bit about your origin story.
Yeah. Grew up in Southern California, been a surfer really since I was about 15 years old. And that has always been really my go-to spiritual practice. Obviously being in nature, connecting with the ocean, riding, waves of energy. It's totally always been a thing that has brought me a lot of peace and calm in my life. And really, as responsibilities and things in life started to increase, I've got 2 young daughters, 10 and 6 years old. And at the time I had a pretty, startup, social media marketing agency. And simultaneously had also started my own organic sunscreen company. And so those things were really starting to take away from a lot of the time that I was spending on myself, mainly surfing. For whatever reason, as the responsibilities increase, our focus on ourselves decreases. One of my favorite people, Jim Quick, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he always says self-care is not selfish. But for whatever reason, we start to think that it is. So, within all the responsibilities in these growing businesses and growing children and family and all the things that are going on, I found myself sort of pulling back from spending time in the ocean. And even when it was like there was a disconnect. It was like I wasn't really even enjoying it anymore. I was more focused on what I should have been doing or could be doing, or all the things that I had responsibilities towards. And it was just kind of starting to come to a point where I was super worn out, and my mind was just constantly elsewhere, not being present. I mean, even at home, it was just like thinking about work and, being in social media. It's like the attachment to the phone was just took over, and not really creating practices for myself to create separation. And so I was just kind of on this search for something to connect into. I've done every sport imaginable. I grew up an athlete. My wife's a yoga teacher, and just never really had other practices in my life. And I heard Wim Hof on a podcast, and I don't remember exactly what he said, but there was something that clicked for me. And I was like, whoa, I got to check this out. This guy has some incredible energy. He's just, zest for life, really. And so I came home and I told my wife about the podcast that I heard, and I was telling her about him, and she was like, "Oh, I was just talking to a friend of ours, Luke, and he mentioned this yesterday. You should call him." So I hit him up. I sent him a text message, and literally his text back to me was, "Oh, are you ready for a life upgrade?" I mean, how can you say no to that, right? And
no
little
kidding.
did I know he actually has been doing breath practice at the time for over 10 years. He was a certified rebirthing facilitator, which is another form of breathwork. So it was just, the universe provides when you're open to receive. And so he came over, we did one breathing session together in my bedroom for about 40 minutes. And I mean, I had never felt like that before in my life. I was just like, what just happened? All I did was breathe. And I went to some far off place and felt my body just pulsating and tingling and just like all this energy and this just sense of peace and connection to myself. And I was like, oh, wow, like I got to figure this out. So I got Wim's original 10-week online course. It was super rudimentary, not a ton of instruction, but I just went full in. I literally did it in like 10 days. I was just like, skip ahead. And from there, I really wanted to learn in person. And I saw Wim was coming to town and just didn't really have the ability to go see him. And so I just signed up for another random workshop in LA. And lo and behold, it was really Wim's sort of right-hand man, this guy named Casper, who developed Wim's teacher training course. And he's a young guy, former science teacher, high school science teacher. And so his ability to like connect the dots with some of the science that I was starting to kind of understand, and then just the way he facilitated this whole experience, it totally opened the door for me. I remember like it was the first ice bath I had ever done, and I stepped up to the ice bath, and I was the first person. That's just the nature of how I roll. I was like, all right, let's just get in there, like be the first one, And I remember stepping up to the ice bath, and he looked in my eyes and he was like, wow, this guy's really looking for something. And I was like, I am. Got in the ice bath, had the whole experience. And then after I was talking to him and I was like, well, what's next? Like, how do I keep going? And he's like, well, I'm doing this trip to Poland. You should come. Literally signed up the next day. And for me, that was like getting totally out of the comfort zone, like flying, to Poland, somewhere I never expected to go in my life. Traveling alone. Like I'm the guy when my wife and family go out, like I'm calling the friends. Like I just don't really, I like to be around people. And so traveling alone was definitely out of the comfort zone. And then getting into a really cold environment. Like I said, I grew up in Southern California. Cold's never been my thing. Like I'm always the guy surfing in the summertime in my wetsuit. Like, so showed up there, didn't know anyone. And I sort of made a promise to myself of like, all right, like you're really getting out of the comfort zone, like lean into that, just go for it. And, anytime someone wants to go out in the cold, go, push yourself to really be meeting people and to go into this experience to make the most of it. And within all of that, like I always say, it's kind of where I learned to love myself again. I just had, shed so many different things. Like my whole body detoxed. The last day is like the pinnacle of the experience. And you hike Mount Schnetzka, which is the tallest mountain. It's right on the Czech border. It's about 1,600 meters high. And that morning, like I felt super sick. Like I was just like, what's going on? And like, how can this be happening to me? And here we are doing this peak experience. And Casper just said to me, he's like, yeah, like we're going to do breathe this morning. Like just go slow and like you'll be fine, And so we went into this breathing session and I just like, my whole body was detoxing. Like I just sweat through my clothes. Like I just smelled, had, a crazy emotional release where I was just like crying for like 30 or 40 minutes. Didn't really know why, but it was just like all this stuff was coming up, and then still feeling kind of down. But afterwards, just kind of mustered up the energy to go. And here I go up this mountain, and it's a pretty wild experience. It's on one side of the mountain is literally like a ski resort, and so you kind of hike up the side on this path, and you go up through the tree line, and then you get above the trees and you come around this bend, and it's like boom, the wind hits you, the temperature drops like substantially. It's like kind of whiteout style, and then we get up above the clouds, and it was like crystal clear, and you come to this plateau, and it's like all these people are there. You know, a lot of people take a chairlift up to the top, and then they hike up to the very top of the mountain. It's like a little like switchback kind of mountain ascent. And so we got there, and all these people around, and I was like, all right, here we go, and make it to the top. And it was just like one of those things that I never thought was possible for myself. And here I am, like minus 20 degrees Celsius in my shorts, and, you know, no shirt, just shorts, beanie, backpack, and, you know, standing at the top of the mountain, feeling like the most empowered that I ever have. And at that moment, I was just like, wow, like I need to teach this. Like I need to share this with people. And for me, like I've always just had an ability to bring community together and bring people together. And so I came home and started having friends. I bought a chest freezer, which I converted to be an ice bath. I started having friends over, and we were in my kids' room, like a few of us packed in there doing breathing. And one of my friends said, dude, you need to grow this, you know, like people need this. And so started hosting, as I was going through the teacher training for the Wim Hof method, I started hosting Sunday sessions at my house. We called them Ice Church, and we would do breathwork in my garage and then go out in the ice bath. And like just this whole community started growing and building. And then I got certified and started teaching workshops. And from there, like I feel super blessed to have had Luke in my life, where he had this other background in breathing that was different from what I was learning. And so being able to experience a different methodology around breath work and just all of his experience really cultivated this curiosity in me to like, okay, like I have one sort of method and technique in my belt. How do I add more to that? And so just tried to soak up as much breath knowledge as I could, and really have come to a place now where I would call myself more of a multidisciplinary teacher, and really looking at what are the principles of breathing that connect all these methods together. So looking at our physiology, our biochemistry, the biomechanics of breath, and then really how that all ladders up to our nervous system. And once we understand those pieces and how that interplays with the nervous system, then we actually have a tool that can empower us to be able to self-regulate, and more importantly, do it in real time. Because our breath is always happening, right? It's here. We're constantly doing it. I mean, even as I'm talking, I'm breathing, but it's something that we're never taught about. We never go through a class that says, okay, this is what our breath is doing for us. I mean, maybe we get like a very rudimentary explanation of it in high school biology class, but the actual practical application of it is never really taught. And so that's really been my mission within all that I'm doing now, is to bring that knowledge of these principles to help people understand how they can use the breath to move through life with a little bit more capacity, a little more fluidity, a little bit more connection to themselves, all of these things. And, you know, that led me to creating my business, which is called Our Breath Collective, which is dedicated to really, as we would say, inspire the extraordinary in everyone, and using breathing as the catalyst for that. So that has really been my journey, and now just focused on sharing and bringing this out into the world and connecting people in community. And so, it's been quite a journey. I luckily, through the pandemic, was able to exit my agency, which was an interesting process and something that sort of evolved naturally. It was like, here I am doing this marketing and selling products that maybe I don't necessarily believe in, and keeping people really attached to the beast of their phone and technology. And then I'm on the other side, like teaching people breathing and all these things to help deal with all that stuff. And so there was a disconnect happening.
Very incongruent at that point. I mean, to feel pulled in both of those directions at the same time.
Yeah. And it was tough. And it wasn't something I like consciously was thinking about, but I just felt my interest within that was totally waning. And that had an impact on my partnership, and through the pandemic and everything that happened there. And our business kind of took a big hit right out of the gate. And it was just like, an opportunity arose where I could step away, and had already started building Our Breath Collective on the side. And it was kind of more of a passion project and very simple of what we were doing. And then this sort of happened, which then allowed me to lean in. And now we've created a lot of programs. You know, the sort of the starting point was people were coming to workshops and different classes and whatnot, and they were like, I love this, but how do I implement a consistent daily practice with it? And, you know, there's apps that have like the breathing bubble, and there's YouTube videos and stuff, but there wasn't something that was like consistent, and there wasn't something that was like short, right? Like, we don't have a ton of time. We can spend 15 or 20 minutes, but to do an hour, it's like, it's hard for people to carve that out. So we said, okay, well, we have our own practices. Let's just start broadcasting them. We're already waking up and doing it. Like, let's just put it out into the world. So we started out, we were doing live breathing sessions every morning at 6 a.m. And from there, it just started to grow. And it was really focused on like practice only. We weren't sharing information or knowledge. Like, people just get stuck in their head of wanting to know why. And it's like, no, just step back from that. Do the practice, feel it, and then you'll start to see the benefits. And then from there, people wanted to know the why. So we started developing courses, and then they went through our courses and they're like, I want to share this. And so now we have a teacher training program. We do retreats, like all of these things. So it's been sort of this beautiful, like organic evolution of it. And alongside that, obviously the breathing community and the breathing world is starting to really accelerate and blow up. You know, James Nestor's book, Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art, coming out in the pandemic. And that really gave a huge lift to all of this. Obviously, people like Andrew, you know, he recently had actually one of our mentors, Dr. Jack Feldman, on the podcast in January, which was really awesome. And so, you know, this merging of, like, as I would say, like art and science, right? Like the art of the practice merged with science is what I think is really allowing for this explosion. Because, you know, things like yoga or meditation, some people think, oh, it's just like this woo woo thing. And so there's a disconnect there for a lot of people. But I think the science that the breath community is bringing in, and credit to Wim on that too. Like, you know, without the science, he would just be like this crazy Dutch dude climbing mountains in his shorts and doing all this wild stuff. But like, once there was science,
which he is still that kind of person.
Yes, he is. But once science came in, then people started to believe it. And so I think that's one thing that's really exciting is, you know, just all the things that are happening behind the scenes with scientific studies and research and all of this stuff. I mean, like the stuff Jack is doing is amazing. And I mean, there's a bunch of others as well. And so it's an exciting time. You know, I always say, like, the breathing world is sort of where yoga was 15 years ago, but it's only going to exponentially grow because the accessibility of it, the science behind it, the power and impact of it. Like I always say, it's high impact, low effort, right? Like we can do it anywhere. We don't need clothes. We don't need to go somewhere. We don't need to do anything. We just sit here and focus on our breath and change it and manipulate it in certain ways to lead us in a direction we're trying to go. So, it's super awesome.
Wow.
Obviously I'm very passionate about it.
But it's, I think your journey, Reis, is going to resonate with a lot of people because, you know, we in our youth, in our adolescence and early adulthood, a lot of our world is fairly person-centric, and I'm pointing at myself right now, like we're kind of focused on like what we do and what we want. And then life starts to shift as like you move in, like you said, into the world of work and kind of starting some businesses, starting a family, having little ones running around that you want to spend time with, but then you've got these other projects and you surf and like that you start getting pulled in just all these different directions. And so what seemed maybe somewhat simple for a while, it was like, oh, I just got to worry about me and do my thing. Now becomes exponentially more complicated. And then trying to figure out, well, how do I do all of these things, period? And how do I do all of these things well, that we can kind of lose a sense of connection with ourselves. And I definitely have heard that theme, that story in the therapy room as I work with people, where it's like, I thought that I was doing things with an intention or a purpose, but I'm not deriving a lot of meaning, or I'm not feeling a sense of connection with it. And there's this questioning, this wandering. And so there was an inflection point for you where you got some exposure to this breath work. You had an experience, right? It wasn't just reading in a book about it or listening to it on a podcast. Like you had this experience. And even as you described it today, like I can almost see you going back to that moment in time, like all the sensations, all of the feelings, like that was powerful for you to the point where it's like, yeah, you can almost put yourself back there again and remember exactly what that was like. And then that obviously that inflection point resulted in this trajectory that you've been on now for, I don't know, how long ago was that? What's the timeline here for this journey?
That was about 6 years ago. Coming up on probably about 7 now. So, it was definitely unexpected. And I think that is part of it, and I think one of the things that I've been blessed with just as a human is my ability to, and awareness to what feels good for me. Like my whole career path has been, what do I like to do? What feels good? What's fueling me? And just follow that. And it's taken me, along many things, I ran a surf blog for a long time, was doing a lot of filmmaking, which has always been a passion. Like I've always had the camera since I was like 12 years old. I had a video camera everywhere I went. And then that led me into marketing and really being passionate about creating content and writing. And then that led me into working with some brands on my own, which led me to my partner. It's just like all these things and just following that and not being attached to this job being my identity. It's like adding to who I am over time, and all of these skills start to build up. And then how do I apply that in a way that actually resonates and feels good? Like you said, with intention. And so I think that's probably a hard part for a lot of people, is they get in a job and their identity gets wrapped up in that. Obviously having a consistent paycheck is very addicting and something hard to step back from. And, I have a lot of compassion for people who are in that position, and we want to feel safe, right? Like I'm sure that's a big theme in all that you're doing.
It's a huge one.
And so it's like, how can you find safety within yourself to allow you to go out and take chances and to follow those passions, follow your heart. And, for whatever reason, I don't know, that spirit has always been within me. And I think really a big catalyst for going down this path in particular has been around having a family and noticing how within the things that I was doing that weren't necessarily serving me in the way that that was having a direct impact on my family and on my kids. And as a father, it's like, I want to show up for them and be an example for them. And, through going through all this transformation and all of these things, like I've shed a lot of things that were not serving me, that I feel like were the catalyst for that was my kids, like I don't drink anymore, like that.
Yeah.
I never was like a big drinker in general, but like just had these sort of realizations of things that were holding me back from really stepping into my power and my like humanness of who I am, and dulling out some of that because I was afraid of it. And now I feel this connection to my power, and not having a need to actually be afraid of like, wow, like I hold a lot of capacity. I hold a lot of energy within me that can help other people. And so, really stepping into that, and believing in myself in a way where, I don't have all the answers. I'm just a normal dude. And as you said, like I had an experience, and I've had a lot of experiences, and that's really where I'm sharing from, is my direct experience. It's like, this is what I've felt and know true for me, and try it on and see where it takes you. Like, I'm not here to tell you like, this is the way. And that's another thing too, is like within the Wim Hof method, it was like, you see this in the yoga world, or really anything. It's like you learn something, and then it's like, this is the only way, right? Like you can only breathe like this. This is the best way to breathe. And through my experience, like, yes, that particular breathing protocol is great for certain instances and certain people, but not for everyone. So being able to give different perspectives and tools and ways of doing things, so then people can uncover what works for them. And to me, that's where this empowerment thing comes from.
Okay. So let's go there, because maybe the audience is familiar with different breathing techniques, maybe certain breath practices, certainly Wim Hof. I mean, that name in the breath community obviously is a big one. He's a very charismatic personality, and people get drawn in, and he's accomplished some incredible feats. I mean, Guinness Book of World Record things and all, and so that's really part of him. And I think sometimes people are like, well, I'm not anything like that, so that like I don't want to be that, or that, that just, it's too dissonant with who they are. But so maybe let's detach a little bit from like the personality or whatever of Wim Hof, or any of the kind of breath work teachers or something. But let's just kind of look at what is breath work. So when you're talking about a certain methodology or a certain practice, can you give us a couple of examples of like, what are some of these different tools that you're talking about?
Yeah. I mean, obviously we could look at different methodologies or sort of schools of breath. There's Wim Hof method, there's rebirthing, transformational breath, holotropic breath. There's all these other ones that are sort of coming up where people are obviously attaching a name to it and sort of proliferating that particular way of breathing. But in general, I would say breath work is conscious, connected breathing, where meaning our breath can be entirely automatic, right? Like most of the day we go through without ever even noticing that we're breathing, and it's happening, part of our autonomic nervous system. We go to bed and our body breathes for us, but the beauty of it is that we do have the ability to put it in manual and change it and manipulate it. So really the practice of breath work is that manual manipulation of the breath. And within most of these techniques, it's moving the breath in a connected, continuous rhythm, whether it's, a certain pattern of breathing or speed, or, how you're breathing through your nose or your mouth or whatever it is. There's all these different elements that you can kind of bring together to create a technique or a protocol or whatever. And that is going to lead you into a certain state of being. So, as I said, like looking at the principles of breathing, understanding our physiology. Okay, how does carbon dioxide and oxygen, what's that relationship together? And how does that impact our physiology and our body? It's like most people don't actually realize that carbon dioxide is kind of the key to the equation. We think about, oxygen, we need oxygen, oxygenate the blood, all of these things. But without carbon dioxide, we actually are not getting oxygen. In order for oxygen to be let off by our red blood cells, we need carbon dioxide present in our body. And carbon dioxide is also what triggers the stimulus to breathe. People think, I have a lack of oxygen, that's signaling to my brain, I need to take a breath. No, it's actually a buildup of CO2 that says, take a breath. So just things like that, where we can start to understand a little bit more of how these things start to interplay together. And then one of the starting points when working with anyone is looking at their mechanics, right? So through life, we go, like, you look at kids and babies breathing, they're breathing really well. Like the breath moves in a very natural pattern. Most kids, not all, but most kids are breathing through their nose. So they haven't gone through life where they have either external stimulus, trauma, things that have happened to them that have shifted their breath. They don't have this mirroring that's built in. It's like you think about our culture and like it's all about the 6-pack abs, and like we hold our bodies in certain ways, and that's restricting our breath. So for me, the starting point is always like, watch someone breathe. Where's the breath moving? Is it starting in the right place? Is it ending in the right place? What's the range of motion? All of those things. And then a lot of times, simply by just re-establishing proper breathing mechanics, a lot of the issues that they have start to fade away. And then from there, it's like understanding your nervous system and all of these different elements of how we breathe, and then creating protocols to take us to a certain state of being. So in a nutshell, like breath work is using your breath through your own conscious control to take you to a certain state of being, be it, arousal, sympathetic, charge, energy, or relaxed, rest and digest, slowing it down, calm, alert, focus, all of these different things. I mean, as you said, obviously listen to Huberman, and he talks a lot about those different states and tools to be able to go there. And I think the breath is so simple, yet so complex. But as I said before, it's always happening. It's with us all the time. And it's really easy to connect into it. And the more that we actually start to pay attention to it and start to use it, then that awareness grows, and we get into a situation, whether it's, a conflict with someone, or maybe you have to go and speak in front of a group of people. And then you're like, oh, wow, I'm breathing in this way. The breath is up on my chest. I'm breathing super fast. And then that awareness creates an opportunity, right? You can actually start to make a choice to slow yourself down or to speed yourself up. And then some of the things that we use to take us there, like coffee or, other medication or drugs, we actually start to figure out, okay, well, I actually don't need that. I can just breathe in a certain way for a minute or 2 or 5, and boom, I'm right there. So that's what I love about it. Yeah.
That's so interesting, because you're touching on a point that I was hoping we would talk about today, and how I think maybe this is overgeneralizing, but I think most people, when they think about breath work, if they do think about it, they think about relaxation. And frankly, like in the counseling room, like doing therapy, oftentimes that is the focus. Like they're in a elevated state, and so whether that's anxiety, whether that's in an emerging panic attack, just even a stress response related to a trauma trigger, everything becomes very tight physically. Neck, shoulders, chest, heart rate accelerates, breathing becomes rapid and shallow, so very much like chest breathing. And so one of the first steps is just reconnecting with belly breathing or diaphragmatic breathing. And so whether it was, kids and teens that I was working with in therapy or adults, like there's just a disconnect between how I'm emotionally feeling and how I'm physically feeling. But those are the pathways between those two are very strong. So when I do something physically, I know that's going to also impact my emotional state. Mm-hmm. So that I think, at least from my perspective, generally when people think about breath work, that's what they're thinking about, like slow, rhythmic, controlled, diaphragmatic breathing, box breathing, something like that, to settle. But here you've talked about increasing alertness, increasing focus, increasing energy through breath work. Could you talk a little bit about that, Reis, and what's the pathway there? What's the connection there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just to kind of step back for a moment, as you were saying, all these different emotional states, that there is a breathing pattern connected to that. So we always like to say breath is a behavior, right? So every behavior that we have, whether it's being in a, anxiety or being super relaxed, like there's a way that we breathe that's associated with that. Even thinking about, when you get home from work and you go lay down on the couch, what do? Right? Like big that's sigh. A behavior that's associated to this down regulating, more relaxing. When you're super frustrated, like you're like, and there's a breathing that goes along with that, or someone scares you. What do? You go, so like all of these different behaviors that we have, there's a way that our breath shows up. And so that awareness piece of understanding when you are feeling a certain way, okay, well, what is my breath doing in that particular moment? And so then you start to be aware of these things, and then that gives you the opportunity to change. As far as breathing being associated by a lot of people around like this down regulation or relax, and I think the reason for that is because we're generally speaking like in a very elevated state. We're in this constant stress mode, like we're redlining on that all the time. You think about life is so fast. We have, all these things to do, and it's just go, go, go. And then the information that we're getting is constant. It's not just like external information from our environment, but it's like information from our phone and the images that we're seeing there, and then where that takes us. And so we're constantly in that state where we're just like amped up and feeling stress and anxiety and all of these things. And so I think a lot of the more external is keeping us there. And so in a place like therapy or whatever, to be able to bring ourselves down, obviously that's what most of us need. But as far as, focused alertness, and those different states that are kind of more associated with positive sympathetic charge or sympathetic state, our breath, being that it has this ability where we're controlling it, we're actually like the captain of the ship, right? We're changing and moving and manipulating it in a certain way rather than the external environment taking us there. That sort of takes the power out of us in being in a more higher arousal state. So the fact that we actually can focus on the breath, moving in a certain pattern, and that actually taking us up, that's going to create the opportunity and the space for us to be more in an alert, aware, focused sense, rather than the environment or the external stimulus taking us there. So I think that's one key thing is like the mindset, right? Like there's so much going on between the ears that the stories are playing and our mind is is overwhelmed with thoughts that are maybe more negatively associated. And when we actually say to ourselves, like, okay, I'm going to breathe in a certain way that maybe normally would be associated to more of a negative emotion. But when I actually do that under my own conscious control, it changes the outcome of where we actually go. So I think that's a big part of it, is like the contextualization of how we're using the breath. And so a lot of times when we do these more upregulatory practices with someone who hasn't done it before, it can be a little bit alarming. It's like, whoa, I'm feeling myself going into a pattern that normally is associated with stress and anxiety. And so that can be overwhelming, but through practice and again, intention, as you said, then we start to see, okay, well, I don't need to attach those emotions and that story to where I'm going. And I can actually feel in my body and in myself what's going on. Then I can be in a more alert, focused place without bringing in that external, or without those negative associations to that. So, I mean, I see that time and time again is working with someone new, and you start moving the breath a little bit faster and in these other patterns, and they're like, whoa, that's too much, but it's like, you're in control. Like, go at your pace. You don't have to go at my pace. I'm just giving suggestions and guidance, and ultimately you're the one to take yourself there. And little by little, it's like titration, right? A little bit over a long period of time, we start to build capacity. We start to create a new story around it. We start to break down some of the limiting beliefs and all of that. And next thing you know, you can breathe a lot faster in a more, rapid pattern and not feel overwhelmed by it anymore. And so I think that's, to me, that I think is a big part of it, is like the mindset behind it. And so it's just connecting mind and body. I think the breath is the bridge between the two. So
cool. Yeah. No, and I appreciate you spending some time just kind of walking through that. And of course, there's a process here. Like anything, you can't just jump in and, I'm just going to do this, right? Yeah. I'm just going to look up some YouTube video and I'm just going to do that. But not recognizing, well, this is actually a pretty powerful practice and it is going to alter my state emotionally, physiologically. And so I need to go into that with, I guess, some sensitivity to that reality, like kind of a healthy respect for it. I remember the first time that I did Wim Hof, and it was just a super basic, like through his app, just like the starter. But it was a highly sensation focused experience. Like you'd said, like my extremities were tingling, like I even had kind of an altered state just in my mind at that point. Like it was very powerful. And, it's like, okay, that's not something that I'm going to do when I'm just sitting at my desk at work or something like, totally. Like that's something very different that like it needs some space and time to like go into that and to come out of that state.
Yeah. And I think that is part of why I have gone down this path of really exploring these principles, because what I've seen is that not everyone is ready for that. We all are, our nervous system, yes, we all have them, but they're all at different levels. And excuse me, we all have different tolerance to certain sensations and emotions. And, when you're like, no, you have to breathe this way, and this is the only way, it's like, that can be traumatic for people. We don't want to take people back into trauma. We don't want to add to it. We want to complete the loop, right? Like, I think that's what trauma is like an incomplete loop. or an incomplete cycle. And so
Mm.
actually, when you start to use the breath in certain ways, you can start to complete cycles. I have a student and now a teacher who told a story about during a rebirthing session that we hosted on our platform, that he so sometimes when you do breath practice, particularly these longer connected breathing, you get what's called tetany, and it's like your hands start to cramp up and your lips and your face start to cramp up, and there's some physiological things that are happening there. But your hands start to come in and you get like these T-Rex hands, and then sometimes your hands come up over your head, and it can be really uncomfortable because it's just like, it feels like everything's tightening up. And so he said that as he was going through this rebirthing session, he got the tetany, and then his hands ended up in a position that he actually realized when he was like 6 or 7 years old. He got hit by a motorcycle in Nigeria. He's from Nigeria. And when he came to after the accident, that's where his hands were. And so wow, he actually said, like, I feel like I actually completed that cycle of trauma within myself, mainly through that realization. Like, I was stuck in this position, and through the breathing, I've found myself in that same position, but then the charge and the trauma behind it no longer was there. So just kind of like really wild stuff, it seems far out, but I've seen that in a lot of different ways, and not always in that extreme of a situation, but yeah, I can't remember exactly where I was going with that, but
no, that's okay.
Yeah, and I think like I said, it's like this titration a little bit at a time over a long period of time, and then it starts to build up, and I think it's always important to remember is like, meet yourself where you are. We tend to want to like push, and then that has impact. But if we can actually, okay, like this is too much. Okay, well then bring it back down and slow it down a little bit, and you're in control. So you can regulate how fast or how much force or all of these things that you're doing within the breathing. And then simultaneously too is like, someone in a high arousal state where they're feeling really anxious and overwhelmed. It's like, you think about, okay, well, I'm going to slow my breath down. I'm going to focus on my exhales, elongate the exhales. I'm going to feel calm. But then you start doing that, and it's almost like more frustrating, right? You're like, it's not working. This is pissing me off. And then the mind starts going crazy, and it almost makes it worse. And it's like, meet yourself where you are. Okay, I'm feeling anxious. My breath is super fast and shallow in my chest. Well, breathe into that. Allow yourself to be in that pattern, and you're consciously doing it. And then you start to slow it down. It's like we try to go from A to Z, but we forget that we need to go B, C, D, E, F, all the way down the ladder. So it's like, breathe into that pattern, then start slowing it down a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Boom. Next thing you know, you're relaxed. So I think that's like something that's missed within all of these methods. It's like, no, like Wim Hof method, we're going to slingshot you into outer space. And like, that is not what everyone needs. And especially now, like looking at our nervous systems, we're so cooked, like 2 years of a pandemic, being isolated, not having this connection to people. Like, we're social beings. We have a social nervous system, and we co-regulate, and we mirror, and we see how people are, and then that gives us permission to be a certain way. And not being able to connect and see people's faces, like there's all these things that are happening, and our nervous systems are so ancient, like they're built for survival for millions of years ago. And we're trying to now live in an environment in 2020 where it's entirely different than where that nervous system was built. So we need to actually understand it and then be able to adapt it for modern life. So I think a lot of those things are just like kind of missing within the breath methods and modalities that, are more traditional in the sense of like Wim Hof or whatever. And I think they're adapting and seeing these things, but, that's always my approach is like, okay, where are you now? what are your goals? Where are you trying to go? And then let's implement the breath into that to help take you there, on your own time, not on what I think it needs to go. It's like, no, you're sort of uncovering what's going on, and you're controlling it in a way where it feels like I can actually make progress here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, patience does not come naturally. That's something that we have to practice and bring intention to. And I again, really value what you're saying, Reis, about meeting people where they're at. And then as people, like, let's meet ourselves where we're at. Let's not put these external expectations on ourselves to be something or do something different than just where we are. And where we are doesn't mean that's where we're going to end up, but there has to be a starting point. And I just appreciate the way you walked through that, and have encouraged a sense of patience for people as they maybe begin some breathwork practices.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to start something like this and like bring some intention to their breathing, where do you typically start somebody?
I would say the starting point is just to like sit down and then just pay attention to your breath. Notice how it's happening, really feeling into the sensation of it. Like breath is movement, right? Like our bodies are moving. We don't really think about that. It is a movement practice. There's so much intricate musculature and movement of our organs and all of these things. So it's like, just kind of sit down, close your eyes, and just tune in and just notice your breath. And obviously, as the minute we put our mind on our breath, we inherently change it, which is fine. But just starting to pay attention to it, and the more that you become aware of it, then the more you start to notice it throughout the day. And as I said, that's the opportunity to then be able to shift. And really, if someone's looking, okay, like what's a really simple practice that I can do? I would say the most basic, simple practice, which is going to kind of really like level you out. It's going to create this coherence or this sense of like slowing down, but connected, and just breathing in for a count of 5 and out for a count of 5, so you have equal inhale, equal exhale. Do that for 2, 3, 5 minutes. And you'll just see like everything just kind of levels out, and you don't feel like you're tired. You don't feel like you're super amped up. You're just like in this very like neutral place. And I think a lot of people could use that, like generally speaking, like we're either like more sympathetically dominant or parasympathetically dominant. We don't really find that middle ground. And so I think that can be a really cool place to just like find baseline. And then from there, obviously there's many ways to manipulate the breath, but I think that is just a really easy practice for people, is like awareness, paying attention to the breath, and then going into more of like a coherent breathing pattern where it's equal in, equal out. Everything starts to align, heart rate, body, all the things. And then you feel really good. And then it's like, okay, that was awesome. Like what's next, and so I think that curiosity is what then fuels it. And, I think another thing that I love about breathing is that like I said, it's high impact, low effort. So you actually don't need to do a lot to feel a change. And then once you feel the change, you're like, wow, okay, that actually worked. What's next? Or what else can I do? And so I think that experiential component is what draws people in. But obviously it's a willingness to try. And then from there, then you see what else is possible. So I think that's just like a really simple practice that people can do. And it doesn't take much. I mean, you could do it for a minute or two, and you're just slowing everything down and paying attention. Your mind is focused on the breath. Yes, it's going to drift, but then you just bring it back. And, there's an app, a bunch of apps like where you could get like a timer, so you don't even have to think about it.
Yeah.
There's many ways to approach that. I do like the counting aspect because it keeps me more focused. It also allows me to create a little bit more breath control, so I can really fill up that time within the inhale, fill up the time within the exhale. It's not like I'm just immediately breathing in and then holding my breath or whatever. It's like, no, you want to use that whole 5 seconds on the inhale, use the whole 5 seconds on the exhale. Breath control is a super important thing, and something that is a result of practicing with your breath, is you have this greater ability to control it. So yeah, there's just so many things that all kind of stack up.
So if you're listening right now, then if you haven't already been paying attention to your breathing, just pause the podcast and do that, right? Just take a couple of minutes here, pay attention, do some counting. I know even as you were talking, like I was bringing my awareness into my breath. I was kind of focusing, okay, like how am I sitting in my chair? You know, I'm kind of like hunched over. I gotta sit back, open up the chest and the stomach and kind of relax into that. And that's just paying attention. It's just starting with a little mindful presence of focusing on the body and where you're at in space. And I think that's a awesome place to start. So I give you permission, pause the podcast, do some breathing right now, but then hit play. Because
a couple other cues to throw in there is like, feel the breath moving into your nose, and like, where do you actually lose track of it? Where, you feel it move into the nasal passage, and then where do you lose track of it? Notice is your belly moving? Notice your ribs. What's the sensation of your ribs opening? Like, our ribs actually open up to the side, sort of like a handle on a bucket, right? We pull up the side of the handle. Our sternum lifts sort of like a water pump, so feel into the sensation of breath. Notice where there's restriction. Notice where you have tension, like where you're holding or where the breath can't quite go. Not making it right or wrong. Again, it's just awareness, noticing. And then, with your mind, where our mind goes, our energy flows. Oh, okay. I notice my left shoulder is like coming up, okay, well then bring the shoulder down, breathe into that space, and try to keep the shoulder still. Sit in front of a mirror and watch yourself breathe. That's another really cool practice that I don't think a lot of people actually do, because as I guide people in breathing sessions and I'm giving cues and I'm watching people, it's like there's such a disconnect between our body and how we think we're breathing in a certain way, but we're not actually, it's like, so sit in front of a mirror and take some full breaths, take a couple fast breaths, take a couple slow breaths, just watch yourself. Are your shoulders coming up? Is there tension in your neck? Is your belly moving? Is how's your whole body connected to all of this? And that will be super illuminating in and of itself.
Yeah. It just takes me back to my childhood and teen years, because I was in karate for a long time, and we had mirrors like all around the deck that we would work out in, and so our instructor always, any movement that we were practicing, any technique, anything, we're doing it in front of the mirror so that we could see ourselves, and then we would also be able to see the people around us too. And it's like, oh well, that's a little different than what I'm doing. And it was the same thing. I was in Tai Chi for a while. And so it was and frankly, Tai Chi is what really tuned me in as a young person into the power of breathing and breath and control and steadiness. And there's a tremendous amount of power that comes from being able to control like every movement that you're making, including your breath. So that takes me back to some really good memories, Reis.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So I got to ask, I know we're getting really close to the end of our time together today. We're going to land this plane, take some final exhales, but you have referenced cold as well. And I know we're not going to take a deep dive into that. Maybe that's a conversation for another day or something, but I see this getting paired oftentimes with breath work. And so you were talking about like ice baths and hiking up a mountain in shorts and a beanie, what's going on? How's cold exposure paired with this breath work, or are they just two separate things, but they just end up kind of people doing the same or doing both of them? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And they can obviously be separate. Like you could do breath and not cold. You can do cold and not breath. I think the reason why you see them come together is that the breathing actually primes our system for being able to get in the cold. So it sort of changes the experience in a way where, through different breathing practices and protocols, we're obviously stimulating all the different systems in our body. One path we can talk about really quickly is just our circulatory system, right? And a lot of breath techniques, Wim Hof, for example, we're breathing in a certain pattern and then we hold our breath. And then we breathe in a pattern and then we hold our breath. So we're actually, as we're breathing, we're getting vasoconstriction, we're dumping carbon dioxide. So our veins constrict. Then we go into a breath hold. Our body needs the oxygen. So it opens up all the vasculature. So we're sort of getting this dynamic pumping of our circulatory system. So that's like strengthening that, right? And then we get into the cold. We go from, static ambient air temperature to getting in the cold. Boom, everything squeezes down. And then we get out, everything opens up. But we've already sort of stimulated that musculature that's opening and closing our circulatory system. So just that one example, it's like the breath is sort of priming us to be able to go into the cold. Now, again, it can be totally separate. Like right before this conversation, I jumped in my ice bath. I'm like, okay, I need to like wake up and get focused and be alert and be on. And I hadn't done any breath. And generally when I get in and I haven't done any priming, I feel a lot more like there's more sensation. Like I feel like I get colder quicker. So they go really well together, but not totally necessary to do both. I guess another connection point too is that a lot of times we think about stress as being a bad thing, right? Like, but it's more about chronic stress. Like when we have this constant, chronic stress, more of the negative association with stress, it has a big impact and very detrimental to our being. But things like breathing and cold exposure, even heat, like going into a sauna, those are more hormetic stressors, acute stress, right? We're actually consciously making the choice to put our body in a stressful situation. And it's a controlled stressor. So our breath, we have control. We can regulate how fast or how slow we're going. An ice bath is a controlled stressor. It's literally a body of water with ice, or maybe it's just cold water. There's not external things that are coming in that are playing into amplifying that. Yes, when you're on a mountain hike and you have wind and you have weather, that changes the game, but or a cold shower, like it's just cold water on your body. So you can actually use that as a tool to be able to move through different nervous system fluctuations. Like you get in the cold, your breath gets super fast, super shallow. You're sort of in this panic, like flight, get me out of here state. Then maybe you shift into more of like, okay, I'm going to fight it out. And you're like tensed up. And then eventually your body says, okay, you're not going anywhere. Let go. And you get to this shift where it's like, okay, I can actually be here. The body surrenders, starts doing its work. And then next thing you know, you're in the ice bath for 3 minutes. It feels like it went by super quick. And then you get out. And so you've just put your body through this whole cascade of stress in a positive way with intention. And then when you go out into life and you're hit with the stress that you don't have control over, you have a little bit more understanding of how your body responds and reacts, and you've trained it to respond and react in a certain way. So I think that's where these practices come into play. It's like I said, I didn't like the cold, and I still have the resistance.
You're still in California.
Yeah. Well, and even I've done hundreds of ice baths and I've taken so many cold showers, and there's always something that comes up like, oh, what's an excuse to get out of this or whatever. But I know that, okay, I do it and then I come out and I feel entirely different. We get a chemical dump of all these happy hormones and you feel super energized, and then you just did something hard, and then everything else that comes out you feels a little bit less. So that's what I love about these other kind of complementary modalities to it. And so it's just understanding again and more awareness to your response to stress, and then knowing that your body actually has the tools to be able to handle that. If you can surrender and get out of the way, your body's going to take over and do the things. I mean, it's like, think about childbirth. Like, our body knows, like, women, it's built in, and the more you fight it and resistance, the harder it gets. And then, you surrender to it and it happens. And you realize, like, holy cow, I have so much more capacity and ability than I allow myself to believe. And that's not to anyone's fault. Like, we're taught these things from day one. It's like, go outside and put your jacket on, put your shoes on. The more we're learning, it's like, no, it'd be great to go outside and build up your immune system, build up your circulatory system, walking around on your feet with bare feet, like stimulating your feet. All these things that we're now kind of seeing as being negative stories that don't necessarily hold as much weight as they once did. So
yeah. I'm sure some of my friends are going to be laughing because I'm in Minnesota and I'm a runner and run outside all winter long or whatever. But a couple of my running friends give me a hard time because as soon as it drops below 50 degrees, like, I've got the tights on and I'm like, no, it's got to be above 50. But honestly, this winter, there were a number of times that I resisted that, and I wore shorts, and it was uncomfortable at first, but also, I don't know, the word invigorating comes to mind. Like, that was like the sensation that I got from just running outside. And I did that just this week on Monday. I was at a state park, and it was probably 32 and overcast and windy, and I just threw shorts on and I was out for an hour, just moving through the bluffs and the woods, and like that feeling of just aliveness, if I can use that as a word, was pretty incredible.
Yeah, that's awesome. And
Reis, I'm wondering about our Breath Collective. You'd mentioned that right at the onset of our podcast is a place that you've really invested a lot of yourself and kind of are starting to create a community around some of these practices. Can you talk just a little bit about kind of the purpose of our Breath Collective and kind of what you're trying to accomplish there?
Yeah, really, we're just trying to share our experience and knowledge of breathing with the world through a variety of different experiences, bringing people together that are curious and want to learn more and experience it, as well as build their own practice. As I said, really, so much of what we're doing is designed around self-empowerment. So, we have our daily breathes. It's a membership. People can come in. We lead at least one practice every day, typically in the morning at 6 a.m. We're here in California, so Pacific time. People can breathe live with us, or all the breathes are saved in an on-demand library. So you could tap in whenever you needed. Like, maybe you did the breathe in the morning, but you want something in the afternoon after lunch that you need to kind of like get some more energy or whatever at any time, really. And we've got 18 different guides that lead on the platform. And we've got additional times during the week too that people lead breathes now as well. We also offer monthly workshops. All of our members get access to those for free, or you can drop in where we bring in other experts in the breath community to share their perspective or different modalities of breathing. And then we also have guests who come in and share sort of these complementary practices, be it, hypnotherapy or other movement practices, whatever. There's just so many connection points between breathing and these other practices. And then we have courses. So we have a Breathwork intensive. That's a 4-week course. And really that goes through the principles. So really understanding the science and the why behind everything, with the goal of you creating your own assessment So you learn all this knowledge, you have access to the daily breathes, you're practicing, then you understand, okay, this particular protocol really works for me for this. And this one, not so much, but maybe it takes me in a different place. So it's really starting to unpack and uncover what works for you. And then we also have a teacher training. It's a 6-month program. We're going on month 4 on Saturday with our group. We've got people all over the globe, from Europe, Australia, North America, South America. And then we lead retreats. So
That's amazing.
we've got a couple retreats coming up. One at the end of May in Topanga, California, just outside of LA at this like really incredible property. And then we're doing one in Costa Rica in July. And we just came back from Tahoe. We did a retreat in Tahoe where we were doing cold mountain hikes, swimming in the lake, doing breathwork every day. So really designed around experience. All of our programs are all based on experience, because the more that you practice and the more that you begin to feel in your body, then obviously the more you start to draw these connections. So that's really what we're focused on. Obviously, we're bringing in other periphery practices, be it cold or heat or movement, meditation, all of these things. So and if anyone wants to check it out, I have a special landing page for your people. If they go to ourbreathcollective.com/wellmind, you can use the code wellmind and get $10 off your first month of membership. Again, that'll get you access to our daily breathes as well as the on-demand library, and then all of our monthly workshops. So anyone who's curious would love
That's
to
fantastic.
share. And
Yeah. I think, the community that listens to the Well Mind and the Our Breath Collective, I think there's a great match there. Thank you for doing that for our listeners. I think that's an awesome opportunity. So please go check it out. See what this breath work is all about. Have your own experience with it. It's beautiful. It's been an awesome time visiting with you today, Reis. I've really appreciated just your story, but also the passion that you have for sharing this with people and inviting people into this practice, into this community. I think it's going to do a lot of good for a lot of people, and just greatly appreciate your time.
Yeah, it's a privilege to be able to share. And I appreciate you for, bringing this out into the world through your lens and your sort of speaker here. And I think it's super important. And I love the synergy here, and appreciate you as a host and just your guidance and patience and questions and everything. So thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor.
Reis, take care. Be well.
Okay. Thank you.
Big thank you to Reis for joining the Well Mind community, and thank you for spending your time with me today. If you enjoyed our conversation, please check out previous episodes and click rate and subscribe through your podcast app. Let people know about the Well Mind podcast and share the episode with someone you think might enjoy giving it a listen. Please check out the links in the show notes as well for Reis's website, socials, and the special offer for Well Mind listeners on Our Breath Collective. Many thanks to the staff here in the Bethany Lutheran College podcast studio for all that you do for the Well Mind. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, be well.